In the 30 seconds after the heart stops, the brain doesn't go quiet. It explodes with the most intense electrical activity ever recorded in a living mind. In 2013, neuroscientist Jima Borjajan at the University of Michigan did something straightforward. She monitored the brains of rats during cardiac arrest and waited for them to go quiet. They didn't. In the 30 seconds after the heart stopped, she recorded a surge of gamma waves, the fastest, most organized brainwave pattern associated with conscious perception, more powerful and more synchronized than anything the rats produced while alive. A dying brain is supposed to fragment. Instead, it briefly became more coherent. But wait, this was rats. Then in 2022, an 87-year-old man died unexpectedly while already connected to an EEG. His brain produced the exact same surge. The machine measuring the end of a life accidentally captured something nobody had been looking for. Here is what most people assume: near-death experiences are a modern phenomenon, probably a product of better resuscitation technology and people surviving things that used to simply kill them. That assumption is wrong by about 4,000 years. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, written around 1550 BCE, describes leaving the body, traveling through darkness toward light, and facing a review of one's entire life. In 1740, French physician Pierre-Jean Dumonchox documented a patient who survived cardiac crisis and described floating above his own body. In 1892, Swiss geologist Albert Heim survived a climbing fall and collected 30 testimonies from other survivors, finding the same tunnel, the same peace, the same reluctance to return. The pattern did not begin with modern medicine. It begins wherever human beings have been close enough to death to come back and describe it. In 1991, a 35-year-old woman named Pam Reynolds was wheeled into the Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix with 2 giant cerebral aneurysms. To save her life, surgeons had to perform a procedure called hypothermic circulatory arrest. They stopped her heart, drained the blood from her brain, and cooled her body to 15 degrees Celsius. Her eyes were taped shut. Molded speakers pumped clicking sounds into both ear canals to monitor her brainstem. Her EEG went flat. By every clinical measure, she was dead. When she recovered, she described the bone saw as sounding like an electric toothbrush with a small notch near the top. She quoted a specific comment a surgeon made about the size of her arteries. She described the surgical instruments before she had ever seen them. Researcher Gerald Worley has argued she may have heard these details during early anesthesia before the deepest phase. The surgeons who were in the room have never fully accepted that explanation. Dutch cardiologist Pim van Lommel spent a decade doing something unusual. Instead of waiting for patients to volunteer their stories, he asked every single cardiac arrest survivor in his hospital, 344 patients across 10 Dutch hospitals, the same structured questions within days of resuscitation. 18% reported a near-death experience. Not a vague feeling of peace. Specific, structured, sequential, leaving the body, a tunnel, light, deceased relatives, a life review, a boundary, a return. Van Lommel's 2001 paper in The Lancet was the first large prospective study to document this systematically. But what stopped him cold was not the percentage. It was the consistency. Patients who had been unconscious, who had never spoken to each other, who came from entirely different backgrounds, described the same architecture of experience in the same order, as if they had all taken the same journey on the same road. Science had a clean answer ready. Oxygen deprivation causes the visual cortex to fail in a specific pattern. Peripheral vision collapses first, which creates tunnel vision, which ends in a bright center point. The endorphin surge during extreme trauma produces profound euphoria. Temporal lobe disruption generates a sense of presence, of being watched, of floating. Put them together and you have a complete biological recipe for every element of a near-death experience, no mystery required. But wait. Ketamine, which mimics oxygen deprivation in the brain, does produce tunnel-and-light experiences. It does not reliably produce structured life reviews, encounters with specific deceased relatives the patient had never met, or accurate perceptions of events happening in the room. And University of Virginia researcher Bruce Grayson, after studying over 1,000 NDE cases across 3 decades, found one detail the oxygen theory cannot touch. 45% of NDEs reported by his subjects included verifiable information about events the patient had no sensory access to during the experience. In 2023, Sam Parnia's AWARE-2 study, the largest hospital investigation of near-death consciousness ever conducted, published results in the journal Resuscitation that quietly overturned a number doctors had trusted for 50 years. The assumption, 10 minutes after cardiac arrest, the brain is permanently damaged and unconscious. The finding, across 567 patients, nearly 40% of survivors showed brain activity returning to near normal, sometimes up to an hour into CPR, with spikes in gamma, delta, theta, alpha, and beta waves all associated with higher cognitive function. One patient correctly recalled a specific word played through headphones during resuscitation, at a moment when their EEG showed minimal activity. Parnia was careful with his language, calling these recalled experiences of death rather than proof of anything beyond biology. But the careful language does not change what the data shows. And what the data shows is that the brain during cardiac arrest is doing something nobody predicted and nobody yet fully understands. Eben Alexander spent 25 years as a Harvard-trained neurosurgeon explaining to patients and families why near-death experiences are neurological artifacts, temporal lobe misfires, oxygen-starved hallucinations, dying brains telling stories. In 2008, a rare strain of bacterial meningitis attacked his cortex. For 7 days, his neocortex, the part of the brain that generates every thought, memory, and experience you have ever had, was so severely impaired his attending physicians gave his family almost no chance. He later described encountering a realm of extraordinary beauty, communicating without language, and meeting a woman whose face radiated unconditional love. He later learned she was a biological sister he had never known. She had died before he discovered her existence, and he recognized her only from a photograph shown to him after recovery. His medical records were reviewed by researcher Bruce Grayson. Grayson published his analysis in 2019 and declined to offer a simple conclusion. The records, he wrote, were consistent with Alexander's account of profound cortical impairment. Here is the uncomfortable part of this story. Near-death experience is now a publishing category, a conference circuit, a spiritual wellness industry generating hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Eben Alexander's Proof of Heaven sold 2 million copies. Anita Moorjani's Dying to Be Me has been translated into 45 languages. The industry has an incentive to present ambiguous data as confirmation and contested cases as settled facts. But the researchers on the other side of this have their own pressures. Materialist neuroscience has a professional incentive to find physical explanations, funding follows consensus, and consensus punishes outliers. Dr. Bruce Grayson spent years at the University of Virginia conducting rigorous NDE research in an environment he described as professionally hostile. The data is real. The people reporting experiences are not lying. What is contested is only the interpretation, and around that interpretation, enormous amounts of money, reputation, and belief are quietly organized. Here is the detail that stops cultural skeptics cold. In 1977, researcher Carlos Ossis and psychiatrist Erlender Haraldson published a cross-cultural study comparing NDE reports from American patients and Indian patients, two populations with almost no shared religious framework. Both groups reported leaving the body. Both reported a review of their lives. Both reported encountering beings of light. The differences were in the cultural clothing. Americans tended to describe the beings as angels or Jesus, Indian patients as Yamduts, messengers of the Hindu god of death. The architecture was identical. The costume was local. In 2006, researcher Alan Kelleher expanded this to indigenous Australian, Native American, Polynesian, and Chinese accounts, finding the same core structure documented in cultures that had never exchanged the concept. Either the same brain is producing the same hallucination regardless of culture, language, and religion, or the experience itself is pointing at something that exists prior to all of them. And the strangest version of this finding belongs to the blind. Kenneth Ring is a psychologist at the University of Connecticut who spent years doing something very specific, interviewing blind people who had near-death experiences. Not people who lost their sight late in life. People blind from birth, people whose visual cortex had never once processed a real image. In 1999, Ring published Mindsight, documenting 31 cases of blind NDEs. 21 of his subjects reported visual perception during their experience. They described the color of clothing worn by medical staff. They described the physical appearance of relatives they had never seen. Several details were later corroborated by the people who had been in the room. The leading neurological explanation for NDE visuals, the failing visual cortex producing phantom imagery, cannot produce accurate, verifiable images in people whose visual cortex has never functioned. Ring did not claim his findings proved an afterlife. What he said was more precise: they prove that the explanation science currently has is incomplete. In 1994, physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff proposed orchestrated objective reduction, (OR), suggesting consciousness arises from quantum-level computations inside microtubules, the protein scaffolding inside neurons. The radical implication: if consciousness has a quantum component, it may not be strictly destroyed by the failure of classical brain function. Most physicists rejected it immediately. The brain is too warm, too chemically noisy for quantum coherence, they argued. But in 2025, Hameroff published a study of 7 terminal patients and found that nearly half exhibited synchronized gamma activity for up to 90 seconds after flatline, the same coherent signature Borjigin first saw in rats in 2013. Orchestra OR remains a minority position. But the minority keeps producing the same number from different directions. And that number, 30 to 90 seconds of organized activity after the brain should be silent, is the number nobody, on any side of this debate, has yet explained away. Here is where the science actually stands in 2025. The gamma surges are real, peer-reviewed, replicated across species, confirmed in humans. The AWARE-2 brain activity findings are real, 567 patients, published in Resuscitation, not disputed. The cross-cultural consistency is real. The blind patient perceptions are documented. What science has not done, and cannot yet do, is connect these facts into a mechanism. It cannot explain why a brain with no oxygen is briefly producing its most organized activity in precisely the region linked to conscious experience. It cannot explain what Kenneth Ring's blind subjects saw. Sam Parnia's own words are the most honest summary available: these experiences provide a glimpse into a real, yet little understood dimension of human consciousness that becomes uncovered with death. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't the tunnel or the light. It's why the dying brain, in its final seconds, appears to be doing something. The question is only what.